Greetings and welcome once again to Aspects of Aliyah, brought to you from the UK. Having looked at the Eden narrative and the Cain and Abel cycle, we move on to the next part of the history of Israel in terms of the three-stranded cord of God, land and people. When we finish Genesis 4, we come along to Genesis chapter 5. Chapter 5 mostly consists of genealogies and provides a background to the growth of what would be the nation, the growth of the population, the families, and some comments with one or two particular individuals appearing there, Enoch in particular, but we'll probably do a whole session on Enoch as time permits and with the Lord's grace. So what we're going to do for the next two, but it might take 3 sessions, going to look at the deluge, Noah's Ark if you like, that story. But before we do that, there's to me the most intriguing passages in the Tanakh, and particularly within Torah itself. And before the account of deluge starts, we have four verses that raise probably more questions than answers. So we're going to look at that today, and I hope you'll enjoy this rather obscure passage. However, has great significance on the whole of our subject. So unusually, I'm going to make the assumption you're all familiar with this text, but I'm actually going to read it just in case you're not. The first 4 verses, only 4 verses of Genesis chapter 6. When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were attractive, and they took as wives any that they chose. Then the Lord said, My spirit shall not abide in man forever, for he is flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the sons of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. Verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made him on earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man, whom I have created from the face of the earth, man and animals and creeping things, the birds of heaven. For I'm sorry that I've made them, but not found favour in the eyes of the Lord. So we're just going to look at the first 4 verses, but I included verses 5 and 6 and 7 just to set the first verses into the context. So, the first 4 verses of chapter 6 possibly contain the most enigmatic short narratives in the biblical corpus. Darren Slade, who was one-time adjunct professor of humanities at Rocky Mountain College and is president of the Global Centre for Religious Research, passed a very telling comment. Slade said, "There's little doubt that the primeval saga of Genesis 6, 1 through 4, would have an astounding exegetical and theological significance to the Bible's meta-narrative, if interpreters could only decipher its content." Well, I think amongst most scholars, that craft despair has echoed down through the centuries. So, just for sake of clarity, we've explained what a primeval saga is, etiological history. Exegesis, of course, is the way that you understand or interpret biblical texts. Meta-narrative is the narrative, the overriding thing, the thing that rides above what's actually being said. That's the whole conceptual package, if you like. So, when stood alone, Genesis 6, 1 through 4, poses several exegetical challenges. As I said in my introduction, the 4 highly enigmatic verses serve as a bridge between biblical primary and secondary prehistory, or the primary and secondary parts of the etiological narrative, and also Bible history in history's more modern sense, from Genesis 11 forwards. When we come to the deluge, you get the end of one period moving into a second period that then moves to history as we more understand it today. So, the reason for the passages, other than introduction to the reason for the deluge, and the items in there remain a little bit obscure. Hermann Gunkel, who's a very famous German theologian, remarked with a large element of dissatisfaction, "The piece is a torso. It can hardly be called a story. The whole thing consists of 3 sentences standing alongside each other in no precise relationship. The original narrative must have been much richer." Now, I think that Hermann Gunkel brought a very good point here, that the notice appears to be in a very condensed form. However, it may be reasonably surmised that the initial audience, the people who first heard this, or the people that it was addressed to, were very familiar with all of the elements contained within this very short narrative. If not, it would have been meaningless, would no point, never have been passed down, transmitted. We can assume reasonably this started off in an oral form before it found a written form. Because production of written material, or even oral histories, by nature were subject to time and financial constraints, most things appeared in a very shorthand way, with the use of idioms and so on. And we have to assume that the people who heard things understood what was being said, and we need to try and understand these sort of things in a similar way, which of course is extremely difficult. So, just an example, in English, if I say table, we all know what a table is, don't we? This is table in the sense of a piece of furniture. Of course, in English, tables can mean various different things, can't they? If I say a table, I don't have to say it could be made of, it's a piece of furniture that's made out of wood. Generally, it usually got 4 legs. It's usually accompanied by chairs or benches that people sit there. I don't have to describe it with one word, table. So if we get various words like Nephilim and so on, then we're supposed to understand what that is. So anyway, it's obviously a very truncated thing. So what the question is in etiological history, is this actually just a myth? Well, it's probably useful to define actually what is meant by a myth. Possibly the most forthcoming definition of the term is proposed by the esteemed French philosopher, who I personally find very interesting to read, Jean-Paul Gustave Ricoeur. He was born in 1913, had a long, distinguished career, down in 2005, who studied various linguistic and psychoanalytic theories of interpretation. So, without getting into an extremely long-winded discussion on Ricoeur, let's just try and decide what a myth is. So, from Ricoeur's work, along with some of the phenomenologists that I've read, such as Heidegger, Gadamer, and Marche, a myth is there, I think, to respond to the following types of questions. How did this particular society come to exist? How did this particular institution come to exist? Why does this event, or rite, religious or secular, exist? Why are certain things forbidden? What legitimizes a particular authority? Why is the human condition so miserable? And finally, why do we suffer and die? Well, the answer really is, before modern science and high levels of education, these weren't questions that could be sat down and debated in masses of books, correspondence, and so on held. And the thing that's more important, of course, is that literacy, 5% at the best in the ancient world. So the best way to do this was to tell stories, to illustrate various points. Parables, mashals in Hebrew literature, and so on. So, therefore, myth shouldn't be understood as simply a false story or just as an explanation of things in the modern sense of the world. It can be defined in various ways according to the context of which the term is applied. So, as I say, without over egging the omelette, a myth, with its time, its space, its events, its characters, and its dramas, all add to understanding the way that things are revealed to us in ways that we can understand or relate to. So, these things can appear in any number of forms. And very often these appear in literature, poetry, religious texts, art, drama, and so on. So let's have a look at Genesis 6:1-4. Let's look at the players, or the dramatist personae, as I like to call them. So the first people that we meet are the Beni Ha Elohim, the sons of God. Now this, at first sight, in English translation, the sons of God come down to earth and have sex with human women. Take them to wife. Yeah. So at first sight, this could appear to be at least semi-divine creatures who are attracted to the daughters of men, and through this were drawn into the drama of humanity and the divine. As a consequence, they end up populating the earth with the offspring of these relationships, who are known as Ha-Giborim. Ha-Giborim, those who were the mighty men of old, men of valor. Now, this sounds a little bit odd, doesn't it? There's obviously some sort of proscribed relationship going on here. The divinity of the Benai Ha-Elohim seems to be confirmed in the structure of the passage. Immediately following the introduction of these creatures, the narrative voice passes over to God, who then pronounces this judgment. My spirit shall not always, Yah or divine, my spirit will not always exist in man, for he is flesh. This statement, connected in grammatical terms to the previous assertion, reads against the mingling of the divine and the human, suggesting perhaps that the Ha-Giborim, the men of old, the men of renown, were a causal factor in God's disappointment with man and a direct response to the punishment of the union between men and the sons of God. So we'll take a break there.
As a musician, I can tell you that timing is everything. The beat of the drum, the pluck of the strings, the tinkling of the ivories, or the strum of the guitar. If you want the music to sound right, then you have to play in time. And if you're joining with others, everyone needs to play at the right moment. You know, it's the same with what God is doing. Our Creator is playing a melody, and the theme of the song is protecting His children. But like any orchestra, it's important that as we join in, that we too get the timing right. You see, timing is everything. And now is the time to become part of the orchestra that God is assembling. Our God-given purpose is to support and stand with the Jewish people. This is the greatest song you could ever sing and the greatest music you could ever play. Won't you join with the band, with Ezra International, as we join with what God is doing? Remember, timing is everything, and that time is now.
Welcome back. So we've looked at this unusual pairing, and furthermore, without providing any explicit information about who they were or where they came from, Genesis 6 then informs us that the Nephilim were on earth at the time. And then the narrative finally returns to solar human sphere. In verse 5, we've got some recognitions that humans have descended irreparably into wickedness. Now, we can see this is picking up a theme that almost really starts in the Garden of Eden, and then we saw it in the Cain and Abel narrative, didn't we? It's where there's a jealousy, where there's a mingling of the human and the divine, or the holy and defiled, which brings great judgment and great destruction. Since the narrative provides no context or introduction to either the Benai Ha-Elohim or the Nephilim, scholars, exegetes if you like, have struggled to find a contextually suitable interpretation for these verses. The consensus has sort of emerged amongst modern scholars that these characters may be a residual echo of a long-forgotten mythical narrative about the creation that has become expunged or written out as time's gone on. Some people think, however, that the elements of the text have been taken out, found their way into, or resurfaced in the pseudepigraphical Enochic literature, books of Enoch 1, 2, 3, and so on. They'll be looking on much further. So firstly, question: is this passage simply a link into the deluge narrative? Secondly, is the passage a prologue? And if so, what is this the purpose and direction? The problem is, of course, is the words are terms. So we've got sons of God, daughters of men. We've got my spirit. Then we've got these words dwell, strive, or exist. Then we have Nephilim, and Giborim, which generally is giant. Giborim, a giant, in its Hebraic general context. So, as we say, the first Genesis 6 1-4 appears to function as a nexus between the two literary parts within the section, including the closing words about increasing world population and leading to the announcement of the annihilation of every living creature on Earth. So I don't want to get into making things too difficult and get into the too heavy points of linguistics, but we're going to just look very quickly now at some of these elements more closely. Sons of God. Introduced suddenly, no introductory preamble. Benai Ha Elohim, as we said, appear to be, at the very least, semi-divine creatures who become attracted to sons of men and become drawn into the human primeval story. As a consequence, as we said, the Gibborim appear, and this seems to be just the whole context of the passage. So, as Christian scholars like to basically ignore this, we're going to have a look at some of the rabbinic positions, some of the Jewish positions. In the rabbinic period, one of the positions was that Benai Ha'Elohim does not mean sons of God. In fact, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, one of the most famous rabbis, would even curse people who took this point of view. So, the word Elohim in Scripture, while generally referring to God, is in essence merely an expression of authority. Similarly, Benai does not necessarily mean literal or physical sons, but just a title. So, therefore, it means, for example, it could be those who are free, not sons of freedom. Benai Chorim, for instance, so means those who are free. So, in this case, Benai Elohim would justly mean the title of people in authority. So, a large scale of Jewish thought is these weren't supernatural people, these were simply wicked authorities. Giants, Hagiborim, giants are often described as kings, are sometimes described as giants in ancient literature. Giants can be described as physically overbearing people or people with authority over massive areas. So, are we to take it, following the Jewish view, that Benai Elohim actually is simply the title of those in authority? So those in authority got jealous of the common people, if you like, took advantage of them and raised monstrous, not physically monstrous, but monstrous, morally and ethically depraved generation. The daughters of men sometimes is an idiomatic expression for what we call a loose woman. So you could say the authorities got themselves involved with loose women, which led to generations of degenerates. So, anyway, the sons of God. Benai Elohim. Again, this contention is that these might have well been angels. However, it does seem that sons of God actually are in this construct. They are some sort of divine beings. Why did the author of Genesis, with the materials he had at his disposal, want to recount something about divine beings? He only used the Elohim in its plural sense if it was to be ambiguous, or should I say, he would have only used it meant to be ambiguous. They're the same word. It can actually be, so it can literally just meant to be a holy one or a son of heaven. An expression found Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's a bit difficult, isn't it? Who are these people? Who are these people? Sons of men, sons of God, daughters of men, Gibborim, I think we've sorted them out pretty much, but the Nephilim. So the Nephilim seems to be derived from the verb root nafal, meaning fall, which of course provokes a question, from whence did they fall? And are they the same identity as the Benai, Elohim? If so, why are they called by two names? So we need to have a look at aspects of divine beings, which takes us, I suppose, basically into aspects of angelology. So the Midrash, which we've spoken about previously, with variations in a number of places. Talmud and the Midrash, many other Jewish writings relate that when the generation of flood went astray, God began to regret having created man. Then two angels, Shamchazai and Azael, that's in Yom 67b, came before God and said, "Did we not warn you before you created man, saying, what is man that you should be mindful of him?" And God replied, "Then what shall become of the world?" "We will suffice instead," they replied. God answered, "I knew that you would live on that world, and the evil inclination would rule you just as much as it controls man, but you'll be even worse." But the angels persisted, saying, "Let's descend the world of men, and we will show you how we will sanctify your name." So, essentially, in Jewish thought, by and large, fallen angels. And we read, don't we, about the fall of angels, 1/3 of angels falling elsewhere in the scriptures. As we said again, these divine titles do also have more secular interpretations, and many scholars would simply want to point out that what's being spoken about here, in the sense of giants and mighty authorities and all these kind of things, it speaks about corrupt authorities. Again, we don't really know. We can only make an educated guess. So I'm going to just close with a couple of suggestions for the term Nephilim. Nephilim are known as this because they were those who fell from the greatness, or two, that's Genesis Rabbah, because they caused the world to fall. Divine beings here. Thirdly, because they caused the hearts of people to fall, trembling before their great stature. Because they fell from heaven, although not without their own consent. Nephilim is Hebrew for giants, which they were, but we need to try and understand, was this in stature, or authority, or in spiritual greatness? When we say spiritual greatness, we don't mean in the sense of holiness. It can mean that also in the sense of evil. So, basically, this is our introduction to the deluge. Those 4 short verses that I'm sure we'll be speaking about for, I was going to say years to come, depending on how many years we've got left. I hope you just found this helpful. These short 4 verses are tied in with our 3-stranded cord because, as we saw in the garden, in the Eden narrative, the fall and the exile was because of wickedness, sin, jealousy, aspiration to divinity, all these kind of things, or behaving like God. Consequence, lose the land. The story of Cain and Abel. Yeah. Usurps got authority over life and death. Consequence, exile from the land. And now we've seen, after the generations, in Genesis chapter 5, that because of wrongful sexual relationships, let's just leave it at that, without getting too elaborate about it, and by abuse of position and authority, by trying to take God's place, then the land is lost again. But there's a remnant, you see. God always leaves a remnant for the three-stranded cord can continue. After the exit from the garden, and after the exile of Cain and the death of Abel, God blesses them with Seth, who goes on in Jewish history to one of the great heroes of the faith. And maybe we'll talk about Seth sometimes ago. In the meantime, I look forward to seeing you again in the midst of the deluge. So until we meet again, God be with you.